Okay. Hello, good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you may happen to be. It is 7 p.m. here in California. I am Tad here in California, and I will be here for about the next hour reading. Still reading The Sword and the Stone. We're in one of the parts I like best, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Let me think. Is there anything much to say? I had an idea today that I wanted to share with you guys because it came to me as I was thinking about the book Splintered Sun, which I'm working on. And I was thinking about how one of the things that one does when putting together something where you're not 100% certain of all the connections that you're going to make in the plot. So you know that something's going to happen here that in a general sense is going to cause something to happen over here later on, et cetera, et cetera. And I suddenly popped onto, or it popped onto me, a metaphor for how that stuff works. And one of the reasons that I often tell new writers or people who are working on their writing to to think things through as much as possible, but more importantly, to finish things, to get through them, to not keep trying to fix the stuff you've already written every time you feel like you've made a step forward in your work. And one of the reasons, and I've explained this over time, it's especially important with big books, but is the idea that you don't necessarily know everything. You want it to appear, especially if the books are going to be published before you finish the story, as happens with multi-volume stories. But you want it to be clear that something is supposed to happen. But you don't always really know yourself what it is. Now, that I brought it up earlier, I think yesterday or last week, about how it's an important part of the multi-volume stories. That you walk that line between over planning and under planning. But it's true even with like a single volume story, like the one I'm working on now, which is going to be complete in one volume. And what I realized that it's most analogous to is those of you who have changed a tire on a car, or changed a wheel, I guess more appropriately. But whatever the case, doesn't matter. It's not the tire part that counts when you get a flat. It's the wheel itself, whether you're taking a spare out of the car or you are patching and reinflating the tire you've got. It's the wheel that has to go back on after the tire is either repaired or replaced. And those who have been taught how to do that are always taught to put the wheel onto the car, and then you take the lug nuts, of which there's usually 5, and those are the little round things that in the wonderful movie Christmas Story that the boy accidentally tosses into the air while he and his dad are by the side of the road at nighttime, and the lug nuts all go flying off in all directions. And he says fudge, except he doesn't say fudge, which is the whole point of the scene, and winds up with a bar of soap stuck in his mouth. But anyway, what that also is analogous to writing sometimes. Not the bar of soap in the mouth, but just the idea of like, oh my God, I completely screwed this one up. Anyway, but the analogy that I wanted to draw is that when you put a wheel back on a car, you do not put a lug nut on, tighten it all the way, put the next lug nut on, tighten it all the way, and so on, and go around the rim. What you do is you put all the lug nuts on, and you tighten one most of the way, and then you go down and you flatten the wheel out, and you tighten the one opposite from it, roughly. And then you go back up to another one that's roughly opposite, and you tighten that. And you do that way so that you are gradually pulling the wheel onto the rim of the wheel onto the actual part that holds it, and tightening as you go so that it tightens up evenly all the way around. And as I was lying there thinking about that, I realized it's very similar to what I'm trying to do with the story, where I have general ideas about things, but I don't always know the actual exact specifics at the moment I'm writing them in first draft. And so what I do is essentially the same thing, which is that I put I put the plot in place, and I put a lug nut on it and tighten it a little bit of the way. And the same thing as each time I get to one of these things. And by tightening them a little bit of the way, but not the whole way, it means that both in my mind and oftentimes in the manuscript itself, I am making a point of either leaving a note or, usually that's it. I just leave a note and it says, have to explain why such and such, And what you're doing when you're doing that is you are carefully, slowly tightening all the nuts in their time, not all at once. And that, therefore, it makes it easier when you need to change things. You can look at all the spots where you had left notes and you can say, okay, so 3 of these 6 different areas or 2 of these 4 different areas need to be firmed up somehow, or I need to make better logical connections between what happens here and what happens there. And as a result, you gradually lock the story down. You don't worry about being able to do everything right at the beginning. You don't worry about trying to fix everything when you suddenly realize, oh, maybe I could do it this way. No, because you have other lug nuts you will need to tighten. So make a note, that's fine. Tell yourself, this could be such and such. But don't bother to write it yet, because that might not be the right answer by the time that you get to the point where you are doing the next complicated bit that you're not sure about. And if you leave them all sort of general and not too tightened down, then when you have a chance, even if it's not till you finish the first draft, you can say to yourself, I know I've got places where I have not made the logical connections rock solid the way I want them to be, and go back and make the adjustments in a small way and see how that works. And if that doesn't work, you haven't rewritten the whole book. You've just fixed a little bit and said, it doesn't really fix it. And you keep messing with it until eventually the wheel of your plot is firmly attached to the hub of the plot, and everything works and it spins, and you can be on your way again toward publication or madness, whatever the case may be. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you guys because I was thinking about it, and I have no idea if that made any sense as an explanation. But if it didn't, I'll go back and work on it, tighten the lug nuts a little bit, and try it again sometime. Anyway, so hi, good evening. I am, as mentioned, working on the Splintered Sun. Most of my work today, because I had a lot of other stuff to do, including an incredibly depressing long stretch of trying to get our cable box working, which of course these days requires sitting on the phone for hours, arguing with an automatic AI voice about not wanting to talk to another AI voice, and eventually getting put through to a line to wait in line to talk to a human, et cetera, et cetera. So, not naming names, it's the way it works these days. But, that killed like 2 hours of my day that probably would have been working time otherwise. Because for me, before I work, I have to be able to think for a while first and kind of run things through and have some quiet brain time. And, when you're sitting there continually rebooting the TV box and having somebody on the other end ask you, have you done this? Did you try this? Would you like to talk to one of our customer service representatives about changing your whatever it is, your account with us, and blah, blah, we have this new offer. And I'm like, just please fix the TV so my wife can watch it. That's all I'm asking. Anyway, so that was a large chunk of my day, as well as running some errands and stuff like that. So, but that's okay. It's a Sunday. I didn't really expect to get a whole lot done. Some Sundays I do, some Sundays I don't. And every now and then I remind myself, hey, I don't have to work 7 days a week. It's not a necessity. It just is kind of a habit. Anyway, so what else was there that I was going to say? Everybody here is well. My lovely and talented wife, Deborah, is doing well. She's working on some of her holiday projects because, of course, with all the fabric art she does, some people in the family and friend circle are going to get presents from her. So she's been busting hump on those for actually weeks and weeks now. Dogs are fine. Everybody's fine. Got to do some vet visits and stuff like that, but nothing crucial to immediate animal health. I'm doing okay. Our young people are okay. And I think we finally solved the washer and dryer problem. We were having a problem with the washer and dryer. And, it's not that big a deal for a couple of days, but for like 3 weeks, it gets to be a big deal. So I think those are finally solved, but I've just reminded myself now that there's something slowly mildewing in the washing machine that I have to get into the dryer. So hooray for me. Okay, what else? Isn't that interesting? Aren't you glad you made a point of watching this? Yes, yeah, blah, blah, blah. World famous writer talking about how his clothes are mildewing in the washer. I just relentlessly undercut expectations. You know what I mean? There's like some writers or some artistic people or actual celebrities, they cultivate that air of mystery. Uh, you can't imagine them ever having to deal with things, let alone be complaining about them. But that's me. There is no mystery, folks. This is what you see is what you get, and it's not all that exciting. And it's certainly not very mysterious. Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm going to check in and see if we've got people who are here and who will talk to me and tell me what's going on. So let me see. What have I got here? Where are the comments gone? Comments. No comments as usual. Comments. Okay, good. So Ron is here. Hello, Ron. And Kyra or Kira, I've forgotten if you told me which one it is. So please do. Isabella, good to see you. Jeremy, my buddy. Emily, hello. Emily and I are going to be doing an event on a YouTube event, I believe it will be, on the 21st of this month. So, but we will have more information about that when we've settled on dates and times and all that, which will be fairly quickly. James, good to see you, buddy. Who else is here? Tracy McClatchy, hello. Sarah, that's Sarah McAtee. Kristen, hello. Good to see you too, Kristen. And Isaac, as always. Barb Ann and Kelly, that's Kelly Kenrick. Claudia, Medardo, Chenoa, and Christy Sanders, and Michelle. That's a new name, spelled Jeys. Jays, maybe. It's hard to say. Could be a number of different pronunciations for that. I'm going to assume it's Jays for now, and someone can tell me. And Susan Shamblin. So all those things have checked in. All those things. Did I just say things? All those people have checked in, at least so far. Anyway, so, and Kira says it's Kira. Okay, very good. That's Kira Anderson, who has checked in to say it's pronounced Kira, and I appreciate that. One of these days, I will maybe get a big list of people's names with their correct pronunciations. One of these days, I'm, as usual, as you can tell, I am not the world's most highly organized person. We used to be a lot more organized when we had an assistant, but it's been a while since that was true, and our assistant has gone on to bigger and better things. We couldn't get her back if we wanted to, brilliant as she was for us. And we just kind of fumble through this stuff. As a matter of fact, I couldn't get anything done if it weren't that Deb does so much heroic business stuff for us, and correspondence and publicity and all the other stuff that she does, and there is much and much. Anyway, so at this point, I think I have done everything that I feel needs to be done in terms of bringing everybody up to date. I'm wearing my The Who t-shirt, and not that has anything to do with anything. And I'm going to go back to The Sword and the Stone. And if you will remember, most of what we read last night was Wart and Merlin and Archimedes, Merlin's owl, talking about birds, and Merlin floating a somewhat silly but interesting idea that all bird songs come from the noises of their environment, which I suspect this is, that was 60 years ago. I think it was one of T.H. White's kind of, he intentionally made it sound a little bit silly, and even showed the Wart and Archimedes being irritated with Merlin for his silly theory. But so I don't think it's necessarily put forward in a serious way. I think it's more like somebody who listens to a lot of birds and spends a lot of time in the countryside floating an idea, and then everybody trying to shoot it down. But anyway, so they talked about that, and then preparatory, of course, to Wart learning how to fly. And that night, Archimedes shows up, gives him a magic mouse, and Wart becomes a bird and learns how to fly from Archimedes, and then he is ready to go and fly with the white-fronted geese. And so we start that next section in which Wart has just flown over a big body of water with a bunch of geese. Of course, he doesn't know them and they don't know him, except that he is a goose, so that he is trusted by the geese, and especially a young female goose who was standing next to him when they took off. And they have now landed in another, I don't remember if it's a mud flat or not. Does it say anything here? No, it's a field. They have landed in a grassy field again as the daylight comes up. So anyway, I'm going to continue with that. Remember, all you need to remember really is that Wart is currently a goose, and so are all the other people around him. They are not people, they are geese, but they are to him other people in the sense that they are like him and he is like them. So anyway, the boy, that's Wart, watching her, it's the other goose, cautiously noted her plump, compacted frame and a set of neat furrows on her neck. These furrows, he saw out of the corner of his eye, were caused by a difference in the feathering. The feathers were concave, which separated them from one another, making a texture of ridges, which he considered graceful. Presently, the young goose gave him a shove with her bill. She had been acting sentry. "You next," she said. She lowered her head without waiting for an answer and began to graze in the same movement. Her feeding took her from his side. He stood sentry. He did not know what he was watching for, nor could he see any enemy except the tussocks and his nibbling mates, but he was not sorry to be a trusted sentinel for them. "What are you doing?" she asked, passing him after half an hour. "I was on guard." "Go on with you," she said with a giggle, or should it be a gaggle. "You are a silly." "Why?" "You know." "Honestly," he said, "I don't. Am I doing it wrong? I don't understand." "Peck the next one. You have been on for twice your time at least." He did as she told him, at which the grazer next to them took over, and then he walked along to feed beside her. They nibbled, noting one another out of beady eyes. "You think I'm stupid," he said shyly, confessing the secret of his real species for the first time to an animal. "But it is because I am not a goose. I was born as a human. This is my first flight, really." She was mildly surprised. "It is unusual," she said. "The humans generally try the swans. The last lot we had were the children of Lear. However, I suppose we're all anseriforms together." "I have heard of the children of Lear." "They didn't enjoy it. They were hopelessly nationalistic and religious, always hanging about round one of the chapels in Ireland. You could say that they hardly noticed the other swans at all." "I am enjoying it." "I thought you were. What were you sent for?" "To learn my education." They grazed in silence until his own words reminded him of something he had wanted to ask. "The sentries," he asked, "are we at war?" She did not understand the word. "War? Are we fighting people?" "Fighting? Fighting?" she asked doubtfully. "The men fight sometimes about their wives and that. And of course there is no bloodshed, only scuffling to find the better man. Is that what you mean?" "No, I meant fighting against armies, against other geese, for instance." She was amused. "How ridiculous! You mean a lot of geese all scuffling at the same time? It would be fun to watch." Her tone surprised him, for his heart was still a kind one, being a boy's. "Fun? To watch them kill each other?" "To kill each other? An army of geese to kill each other?" She began to understand this idea, slowly and doubtfully, an expression of distaste coming over her face. When it had sunk in, she left him. She went away to another part of the field in silence. He followed, but she turned her back. Moving round to get a glimpse of her eyes, he was startled by their dislike, a look as if he had made some obscene suggestion. He said lamely, I'm sorry. I don't understand. Leave talking about it. I am sorry. Later, he added with annoyance, a person can ask, I suppose. It seems a natural question with the centuries. But she was thoroughly angry. Will you stop about it at once? What a horrible mind you must have. You have no right to say such things. And of course there are sentries. There are the gerfalcons and the peregrines, aren't there? The foxes and the ermines and the humans with their nets. These are natural enemies. But what creature could be so low as to go about in bands to murder others of its own blood? Ants do, he said obstinately. I was only trying to learn. She relented with an effort to be good-natured. She wanted to be broad-minded if she could, for she was rather a blue stocking. For those of you who don't recognize that phrase, as I recall, blue stocking is an old term for those who are entertained by defying society, or at least shocking society. She wanted to be broad-minded if she could, for she was rather a blue stocking. My name is Liu Liok. You had better call yourself Kikwa, and then the rest will think you came from Hungary. Do you all come here from different places? Well, in parties, of course. There are some here from Siberia, some from Lapland, and I can see one or two from Iceland. But don't they fight each other for the pasture? Dear me, you are a silly, she said. There are no boundaries among the geese. What are boundaries, please? Imaginary lines on the earth, I suppose. How can you have boundaries if you fly? Those ants of yours, and the humans too, would have to stop fighting in the end if they took to the air. I like fighting, said the wart. It is knightly. Because you're a baby. Chapter 19. There was something magical about the time and space commanded by Merlin, for the wart seemed to be passing many days and nights among the gray people during the one spring night when he had left his body asleep under the bearskin. He grew to be fond of Liu Liok, in spite of her being a girl. He was always asking her questions about the geese. She taught him what she knew with gentle kindness, and the more he learned, the more he came to love her brave, noble, quiet, and intelligent relations. She told him how every white front was an individual, not governed by laws or leaders except when they came about spontaneously. They had no kings like Uther, no laws like the bitter Norman ones. They did not own things in common. Any goose who found something nice to eat considered it his own and would peck any other one who tried to thieve it. At the same time, no goose claimed any exclusive territorial right in any part of the world, except its nest, and that was private property. She told him a great deal about migration. The first goose, she said, I suppose, who made the flight from Siberia to Lincolnshire and back again must have brought up a family in Siberia. Then, when the winter came and it was necessary to find new food, he must have groped his way over the same route, being the only one who knew it. He will have been followed by his growing family year after year, their pilot and their admiral. When the time came for him to die, obviously the next best pilots would have been his eldest sons, who would have covered the route more often than the others. Naturally, the younger sons and fledglings would have been uncertain about it, and therefore would have been glad to follow somebody who knew. Perhaps among the eldest sons there would have been some who were famous for being muddle-headed, and the family would hardly care to trust them. This, she said, is how an admiral is elected. Perhaps Wink Wink will come to our family in the autumn, and he will say, Excuse me, but have you by any chance got a reliable pilot in your lot? Poor old Granddad died at Cloudberry time, and Uncle Onk is inefficient. We were looking for somebody to follow. Then we will say, Great Uncle will be delighted if you care to hitch up with us, but mind, we cannot take responsibility if things go wrong. Thank you very much, he will say. I am sure your great uncle can be relied on. Do you mind if I mention this matter to the honks, who are, I happen to know, in the same difficulty. Not at all. And that, she explained, is how Great Uncle became an admiral. It is a good way. Look at his bars, she said respectfully, and they both glanced at the portly patriarch, whose breast was indeed barred with black stripes, like the gold rings on an admiral's sleeve. There was a growing excitement among the host. The young geese flirted outrageously, or collected in parties to discuss their pilots. They played games, too, like children excited at the prospect of a party. One of these games was to stand in a circle, while the junior ganders, one after another, walked into the middle of it with their heads stretched out, pretending to hiss. When they were halfway across the circle, they would run the last part, flapping their wings. This was to show how brave they were, and what excellent admirals they would make when they grew up. Also, the strange habit of shaking their bills sideways, which was usual before flight, began to grow upon them. The elders and sages, who knew the migration routes, became uneasy also. They kept a wise eye on the cloud formations, summing up the wind and the strength of it, and what air it was coming from. The admirals, heavy with responsibility, paced their quarter-decks with ponderous tread. "Why am I restless?" he asked. "Why do I have this feeling in my blood?" "Wait and see," she said mysteriously. "Tomorrow, perhaps, or the day after." When the day came, there was a difference about the salt marsh and the slob. The ant-like man who had walked out so patiently every sunrise to his long nets, with the tides fixed firmly in his head, because to make a mistake in them was certainly death, heard a far bugle in the sky. He saw no thousands on the mudflats, and there were none in the pastures from which he had come. He was a nice man in his way, for he stood still solemnly and took off his leather hat. He did this every spring, religiously, when the wild geese left him, and every autumn, when he saw the first returning gaggle. In a steamer, it takes 2 or 3 days to cross the North Sea. So many hours of slobbering through the viscous water. But for the geese, for the sailors of the air, for the angled wedges tearing clouds to tatters, for the singers of the sky with a gale behind them, 70 miles an hour behind another 70, for those mysterious geographers, 3 miles up, they say, with cumulus for their floor instead of water, for them it was a different matter. The songs they sang were full of it. Some were vulgar, some were sagas, some were light-hearted to a degree. One silly one, which amused the wart, was as follows. "We wander the sky with many a cronk, and land in the pasture fields with a plonk. Hank, hank, hink, hink, honk, honk. Then we bend our necks with a curious kink, like the bend which the plumber puts under the sink. Honk, honk, hank, hank, hink, hink. And we feed away in a sociable rank, tearing the grass with a sideways yank. Hink, hink, honk, honk, hank, hank. But hink or honk, we relish the plonk, and honk or hank, we relish the rank. And hank or hink, we think it a jink, to honk or hank or hink." A sentimental one was, wild and free, bring back my gander to me, to me." And once, while they were passing over a rocky island populated by barnacle geese, who looked like spinsters in black leather gloves, gray toques, and jet beads, the entire squadron burst out derisively with, "Branta Bernicula sits slumming in the slob. Branta Bernicula sits a-slumming in the slob. Branta Bernicula sits a-slumming in the slob, while we go sauntering along. Glory, glory, here we go, dear. Glory, glory, here we go, dear. Glory, glory, here we go, dear, to the North Pole sauntering along." One of the more Scandinavian songs was called "The Boon of Life." Kiao replied, The boon of life is health. Paddlefoot, feather straight, supple neck, button eye, these have the world's wealth. Aged Ankh answered, honor is our all. Pathfinder, people feeder, plan provider, sage commander, these hear the call. Leoliok the lightsome said, love I had liefer. Deuce down, tender tread, warm nest, and walk in line, these live forever. Ang Ung was for appetite. Ah, he said, eating. Gander gobble, tear grass, stubble stalk, stuff crop, these take some beating. Wink Wink praised comrades, the fair free fraternity. Line astern, echelon, arrowhead over cloud, these learn eternity. But I, Liao, choose laymaking, of loud lilts which linger, horn music, laughter song, epic heart, ape the world, these Liao, the singer. Sometimes when they came down from the cirrus levels to catch a better wind, they would find themselves among the flocks of cumulus, huge towers of mottled vapor, looking as white as Monday's washing and as solid as meringues. Perhaps one of these piled up blossoms of the sky, these snow-white droppings of a gigantic Pegasus, would lie before them several miles away. They would set their course toward it, seeing it grow bigger, silently and imperceptibly, a motionless growth. And then, when they were at it, when they were about to bang their noses with a shock against its seeming solid mass, the sun would dim. Wraiths of mist, suddenly moving like serpents of the air, would coil about them for a second. Gray damp would be around them, and the sun, a copper penny, would fade away. The wings next to their own wings would shade into vacancy, until each bird was a lonely sound in cold annihilation, a presence after uncreation. And there they would hang, in chartless nothing, seemingly without speed or left or right, or top or bottom, until as suddenly as ever the copper penny glowed and the serpents writhed. Then, in a moment of time, they would be in the jeweled world once more, a sea under them like turquoise, and all the gorgeous palaces of heaven new created, with the dew of Eden not yet dry. One of the peaks of the migration came when they passed a rock cliff of the ocean. There were other peaks when, for instance, their line of flight was crossed by an Indian file of Buick swans who were off to Abisko, making a noise as they went like little dogs barking through handkerchiefs, or when they overtook a horned owl plodding manfully along. Among the warm feathers of whose back, so they said, a tiny wren was taking her free ride. But the lonely island was the best. It was a town of birds. They were all hatching, all quarreling, all friendly, nevertheless. On top of the cliff, where the short turf was, there were myriads of puffins, busy with their burrows. Below them, in Razorbill Street, the birds were packed so close and on such narrow ledges that they had to stand with their backs to the sea, holding tight with their long toes. In Guillemot Street, below that, the guillemots held their sharp toy-like faces upward, as thrushes do when hatching. Lowest of all, there were the kittiwake slums, and all the birds who, like humans, only laid one egg each, were jammed so tight that their heads were interlaced. They had so little of this famous living space of ours that when a new bird insisted on landing at a ledge which was already full, one of the other birds had to tumble off. Yet they were in good humor, so cheerful and cockneyfied and teasing one another. They were like an innumerable crowd of fishwives on the largest grandstand in the world, breaking out into private disputes, eating out of paper bags, chipping the referee, singing comic songs, admonishing their children and complaining of their husbands. "Move over a bit, auntie," they said, "or shove along, grandma. There's that Flossie gone and sat on the shrimps. Put the toffee in your pocket, dearie, and blow your nose. Locks if it isn't Uncle Albert with the beer. Any room for a little un? There goes Aunt Emma falling off the ledge. Is me hat on straight? Crikey, this ain't half a do. They kept more or less to their own kind, but they were not mean about it. Here and there, in Guillemot Street, there would be an obstinate kittiwake sitting on a projection and determined to have her rights. Perhaps there were 10,000 of them, and the noise they made was deafening. Then there were the fjords and islands of Norway. It was about one of these islands, by the way, that the great W.H. Hudson related a true goose story which ought to make people think. There was a coastal farmer, he tells us, whose island suffered under a nuisance of foxes, so he set up a fox trap on one of them. When he visited the trap next day, he found that an old wild goose had been caught in it, obviously a grand admiral because of his toughness and his heavy bars. This farmer took the goose home alive, pinioned it, bound up its leg, and turned it out with his own ducks and poultry in the farmyard. Now, one of the effects of the fox plague was that the farmer had to lock his hen house at night. He used to go round in the evening to drive them in, and then he would lock the door. After a time, he began to notice a curious circumstance, which was that the hens, instead of having to be collected, would be found waiting for him in the hut. He watched the process one evening and discovered that the captive potentate had taken on himself the responsibility which he had with his own intelligence observed. Every night at locking up time, the sagacious old admiral would round up his domestic comrades, whose leadership he had assumed, and would prudently assemble them in the proper place by his own efforts, as if he had fully understood the situation. Nor did the free wild geese, his sometimes followers, ever again settle on the other island, previously a haunt of theirs, from which their captain had been spirited away. Last of all, beyond the islands, there was the landing at their first day's destination. Oh, the whiffling of delight and self-congratulation! They tumbled out of the sky, side-slipping, stunting, even doing spinning nosedives. They were proud of themselves and of their pilot, agog for the family pleasures which were in store. They planed for the last part on down-curved wings. At the last moment, they scooped the wind with them, flapping them vigorously. Next, bump, they were on the ground. They held their wings above their heads for a moment, then folded them with a quick and pretty neatness. They had crossed the North Sea. "Well, Wart," said Kay in an exasperated voice, "do you want all the rug? And why do you heave and mutter so? You are snoring, too." "I don't snore," replied the Wart indignantly. "You do." "I don't." "You do." "You honk like a goose." "I don't." "You do." "I don't, and you snore worse." "No, I don't." "Yes, you do." "How can I snore worse if you don't snore at all?" By the time they had thrashed this out, they were late for breakfast. They dressed hurriedly and ran out into the spring. Chapter 20. It was haymaking again, and Merlin had been with them a year. The wind had visited them, and the snow, and the rain, and the sun once more. The boys looked longer in the leg, but otherwise everything was the same. 6 other years passed by. Sometimes Sir Grummore came on a visit. Sometimes King Pellinore could be descried galloping over the purlieus after the beast, or with the beast after him if they happened to have got muddled up. Cully lost the vertical stripes of his first year's plumage and became grayer, grimmer, madder, and distinguished by smart horizontal bars where the long stripes had been. The merlins were released every winter, and new ones caught again next year. Hobbs' hair went white. The sergeant-at-arms developed a pot belly and nearly died of shame, but continued to cry out, "Want to?" in a huskier voice on every possible occasion. Nobody else seemed to change at all, except the boys. These grew longer. They ran like wild colts as before, and went to see Robin when they had a mind to, and had innumerable adventures too lengthy to be recorded. Merlin's extra tuition went on just the same, For in those days, even the grown-up people were so childish that they saw nothing uninteresting in being turned into owls. The wart was changed into countless different animals. The only difference was that now, in their fencing lessons, Kay and his companion were an easy match for the pot-bellied sergeant, and paid him back accidentally for many of the buffets which he had once given them. They had more and more proper weapons as presents when they had reached their teens, until in the end they had full suits of armor and bows nearly 6 feet long, which would shoot the cloth-yard shaft. You were not supposed to use a bow longer than your own height, for it was considered that by doing so you were expending unnecessary energy, rather like using an elephant gun to shoot a mosquito with. At any rate, modest men were careful not to overbow themselves. It was a form of boasting. As the years went by, Kay became more difficult. He always used a bow too big for him, and did not shoot very accurately with it either. He lost his temper and challenged nearly everybody to have a fight, and in those few cases where he did actually have the fight, he was invariably beaten. Also, he became sarcastic. He made the sergeant miserable by nagging about his stomach, and went on at the wart about his father and mother when Sir Ector was not about. He did not seem to want to do this. It was as if he disliked it but could not help it. The wart continued to be stupid, fond of Kay, and interested in birds. Merlin looked younger every year, which was only natural, because he was. Archimedes was married and brought up several handsome families of quilly youngsters in the tower room. Sir Ector got sciatica. 3 trees were struck by lightning. Master Twitey came every Christmas without altering a hair. Master Passeljeu remembered a new verse about King Cole. The years passed regularly, and the old English snow lay as it was expected to lie, sometimes with a robin redbreast in one corner of the picture, a church bell or a lighted window in the other. And in the end it was nearly time for Kay's initiation as a full-blown knight. Proportionately, as the day became nearer, the two boys drifted apart. For Kay did not care to associate with the wart any longer on the same terms, because he would need to be more dignified as a knight, and could not afford to have his squire on intimate terms with him. The wart, who would have to be the squire, followed him about disconsolately as long as he was allowed to do so, and The wart, who would have to be the squire, followed him about disconsolately as long as he was allowed to do so, and then went off full miserably to amuse himself alone as best he might. He went to the kitchen. "Well, I am a Cinderella now," he said to himself, "even if I have had the best of it for some mysterious reason up to the present time. In our education, now I must pay for my past pleasures and for seeing all those delightful dragons, witches, fishes, camelopards, pismires, wild geese, and such like, by being a second-rate squire and holding Kay's extra spears for him while he hoves by some well or other and jousts with all comers. Never mind. I've had a good time while it lasted, and it is not such bad fun being a Cinderella when you can do it in a kitchen which has a fireplace big enough to roast an ox." And the wart looked around the busy kitchen, which was colored by the flames till it looked like hell, with sorrowful affection. The education of any civilized gentleman in those days used to go through 3 stages: page, squire, knight, and at any rate the wart had been through the first 2 of these. It was rather like being the son of a modern gentleman who has made his money out of trade, for your father started you on the bottom rung even then, in your education of manners. As a page, Ward had learned to lay the tables with 3 cloths and a carpet, and to bring meat from the kitchen, and to serve Sir Ector or his guests on bended knee, with one clean towel over his shoulder, one for each visitor and one to wipe the basins. He had been taught all the noble arts of servility, and from the earliest time that he could remember there had lain pleasantly in the end of his nose the various scents of mint, used to freshen the water in the ewers, or of basil, chamomile, fennel, hyssop, and lavender, which he had been taught to strew on the rushy floors, or of the angelica, saffron, aniseed, and tarragon, which were used to spice the savories which he had to carry. So, he was accustomed to the kitchen, quite apart from the fact that everybody who lived in the castle was a friend of his, who might be visited on any occasion. Wart sat in the enormous firelight and looked about him with pleasure. He looked upon the long spits which he had often turned when he was smaller, sitting behind an old straw target soaked in water, so that he would not be roasted himself, and upon the ladles and spoons whose handles could be measured in yards, with which he had been accustomed to baste the meat. He watched with water in his mouth the arrangements for the evening meal, a boar's head with a lemon in its jaws and split almond whiskers, which would be served with a fanfare of trumpets, a kind of pork pie with sour apple juice, peppered custard, and several birds' legs or spiced leaves sticking out of the top to show what was in it, and a most luscious-looking frumenty, which is a kind of dessert, by the way. He said to himself with a sigh, "It is not so bad being a servant, after all." "Still sighing?" asked Merlin, who had turned up from somewhere. "As you were that day when we went to watch King Pelinor's joust." "Oh, no," said the wart. "Or rather, oh, yes, and for the same reason. But I don't really mind. I am sure that I shall make a better squire than old Kay would. Look at the saffron going into that frumenty. It just matches the firelight on the hams in the chimney." "It is lovely," said the magician. "Only fools want to be great." "Kay won't tell me," said the wart, "what happens when you are made a knight. He says it is too sacred. What does happen?" "Only a lot of fuss. You will have to undress him and put him into a bath, hung with rich hangings, and then 2 experienced knights will turn up. Probably Sir Ector will get hold of old Grummore and King Pellinore, and they will both sit on the edge of the bath and give him a long lecture about the ideals of chivalry, such as they are. When they have done, they will pour some of the bath water over him and sign him with the cross, and then you will have to conduct him into a clean bed to get dry. Then you dress him up as a hermit and take him off to the chapel, and there he stays awake all night, watching his armor and saying prayers. People say it is lonely and terrible for him in his vigil, but it is not at all lonely, really, because the vicar and the man who sees to the candles, and an armed guard, and probably you as well, as his esquire, will have to sit up with him at the same time. In the morning, you lead him off to bed to have a good sleep, as soon as he has confessed and heard Mass, and offered a candle with a piece of money stuck into it as near the lighted end as possible. And then, when all are rested, you dress him up again in his very best clothes for dinner. Before dinner, you lead him into the hall with his spurs and sword all ready, and King Pellinore puts on the first spur, and Sir Grummore puts on the second, and then Sir Ector girds on the sword and kisses him, and smacks him on the shoulder, and says, "Be thou a good knight." Is that all? No. You go to the chapel again, and then Kay offers his sword to the vicar, and the vicar gives it back to him, and after that our good cook over there meets him at the door and claims his spurs as a reward, and says, "I shall keep these spurs for you, and if at any time you don't behave as a true knight should do, why, I shall pop them in the soup." That is the end? Yes, except for the dinner. If I were to be made a knight, said the wart, staring dreamily into the fire, I should insist on doing my vigil by myself, as Hob does with his hawks. And I should pray to God to let me encounter all the evil in the world, in my own person, so that if I conquered, there would be none left, and if I were defeated, I would be the one to suffer for it." "That would be extremely presumptuous of you," said Merlin, "and you would be conquered, and you would suffer for it." "I shouldn't mind." "Wouldn't you? Wait till it happens and see." "Why do people not think when they are grown up as I do when I'm young?" "Oh, dear," said Merlin, "you are making me feel confused. Suppose you wait till you are grown up and know the reason." "I don't think that is an answer at all," replied the wart justly. Merlin wrung his hands. "Well, anyway," he said, "suppose they did not let you stand against all the evil in the world." "I could ask," said the wart. "You could ask," repeated Merlin. He thrust the end of his beard into his mouth, stared tragically at the fire, and began to munch it fiercely. Chapter 21. The day for the ceremony drew near. The invitations to King Pellinore and Sir Grummore were sent out, and the wart himself withdrew more and more into the kitchen. "Come on, Wart, old boy," said Sir Ector ruefully. "I didn't think you would take it so bad. It doesn't become you to do this sulking." "I'm not sulking," said the wart. "I don't mind a bit, and I'm very glad that Kay is going to be a knight. Please don't think I am sulking." "You are a good boy," said Sir Ector. "I know you're not sulking really, but do cheer up. Kay isn't such a bad stick, you know, in his way." "Kay is a splendid chap," said the wart. "Only I was not happy because he did not seem to want to go hawking or anything with me any more." "It is his youthfulness," said Sir Ector. "It will all clear up." "I'm sure it will," said the wart. "It is only that he does not want me to go with him just at the moment, and so, of course, I don't go." "But I will go," added the wart. "As soon as he commands me, I will do exactly what he says. Honestly, I think Kay is a good person, and I was not sulking a bit." "You have a glass of this canary," said Sir Ector, "and go see if old Merlin can't cheer you up." "Sir Ector has given me a glass of canary," said the wart, "and sent me to see if you can't cheer me up." "Sir Ector," said Merlin, "is a wise man." "Well?" "Well," said the wart, "what about it?" "The best thing for being sad," replied Merlin, beginning to puff and blow, "is to learn something. That is the only thing that never fails. You may grow old and trembling in your anatomies. You may lie awake at night listening to the disorder of your veins. You may miss your only love. You may see the world about you devastated by evil lunatics, or know your honor trampled in the sewers of baser minds. There is only one thing for it, then, to learn. Learn why the world wags, and what wags it. That is the only thing which the mind can never exhaust, never alienate, never be tortured by, never fear or distrust, and never dream of regretting. Learning is the thing for you. Look at what a lot of things there are to learn. Pure science, the only purity there is. You can learn astronomy in a lifetime, natural history in 3, literature in 6, and then after you have exhausted 1,000,000,000 lifetimes in biology and medicine and the theocriticism and geography and history and economics, why, you can start to make a cartwheel out of the appropriate wood, or spend 50 years learning to begin to learn to beat your adversary at fencing. After that, you can start again on mathematics, until it is time to learn to plow. Apart from all those things, said the wart, what do you suggest for me just now? Let me see, said the magician, considering. We have had a short 6 years of this, and in that time I think I am right in saying that you have been many kinds of animal, vegetable, mineral, etc. Many things in earth, air, fire, and water. I don't know much, said the wart, about the animals and earth. Then you had better meet my friend the badger. I've never met a badger. Good, said Merlin. Except for Archimedes, he is the most learned creature I know. You will like him. By the way, added the magician, stopping in the middle of his spell, there is one thing I ought to tell you. This is the last time I shall be able to turn you into anything. All the magic for that sort of thing has been used up, and this will be the end of your education. When Kay has been knighted, my labors will be over. You will have to go away then to be his squire in the wide world, and I shall go elsewhere. Do you think you have learned anything? I have learned, and been happy. That's right, then, said Merlin. Try to remember what you learned. He proceeded with the spell, pointing his wand of lignum vitae at the little bear, the star, which had just begun to glow in the dimity as it hung by its tail from the North Star, and he called out cheerfully, Have a good time for the last visit. Give love to Badger. The call sounded from far away, and Wart found himself standing by the side of an ancient tumulus, like an enormous molehill, with a black hole in front of him. Badger lives in there, he said to himself, and I am supposed to go and talk to him. But I won't. It was bad enough never to be a knight, but now my own dear tutor that I found on the only quest I shall ever have is to be taken from me also, and there will be no more natural history. Very well, I will have one more night of joy before I am condemned, and as I am a wild beast now, I will be a wild beast, and there it is. So he trundled off fiercely over the twilight snow, for it was winter. If you are feeling desperate, a badger is a good thing to be. A relation of the bears, otters, and weasels, you are the nearest thing to a bear now left in England. And your skin is so thick that it makes no difference who bites you. So far as your own bite is concerned, there is something about the formation of your jaw which makes it almost impossible to be dislocated. And so, however much the thing you are biting twists about, there is no reason why you should ever let go. Badgers are one of the few creatures which can munch up hedgehogs unconcernedly, just as they can munch up everything else, from wasps' nests and roots to baby rabbits. It so happened that a sleeping hedgehog was the first thing which came in the wart's way. "Hedge pig," said the wart, peering at his victim with blurred, short-sighted eyes, "I am going to munch you up." The hedgehog, which had hidden its bright little eye buttons and long, sensitive nose inside its curl, and which had ornamented its spikes with a not very tasteful arrangement of dead leaves before going to bed for the winter in its grassy nest, woke up at this and squealed most lamentably. "The more you squeal," said the wart, "the more I shall gnash. It makes my blood boil within me." "Oh, Maester Brock," cried the hedgehog, holding himself tight shut, "good Maester Brock, show mercy to a poor urchin, and don't he be tyrannical. Us be't no common tiggy, Maester, for to be munched and mumbled. Have mercy, kind sir, on a harmless, flea-bitten crofter which can't tell his left hand nor his right." "Hedge pig," said the wart remorselessly, "forbear to whine, neither thrice nor once." "Alas, my poor wife and childer." "I bet you've not got any. Come out of that, thou tramp. Prepare to meet thy doom." And that's where we're going to stop, because we still got, I think we're going to finish the book next weekend. Actually, I'm pretty sure that we're going to finish the book next weekend. So how many pages? Excuse me. How many pages have we got? Yeah, we got about 30, 28 pages. I think we can finish that one off next weekend. Okay, well, anyway, so there we is. And we're going to wrap it up for tonight. And I am going to get rid of that first of all. Sorry, bear with me for a moment. Okay, so again, as always, I am extremely grateful for your company. As I said, we're almost done. We're going to be finishing the book up next week. In the interim, I will be thinking about what else we may or may not do, and what else we might read, or whatever. We'll figure it out as we go. But it looks like we will have enough to read the rest of the book with the Badger section and Kay's knighting ceremony in merry old London. So with all of that said, again, thank you so much for joining me. Have a very good week. Take good care of yourself. Take good care of your friends and loved ones. Extend a helping hand when you can to those around you who might need it. And I will see you very soon. Peace. Be well.